How Mussolini's ambitions led Italy to its downfall in World War II. After the March on Rome in October 1922, Benito Mussolini became the youngest Italian prime minister up to that date. He swiftly removed political opposition through his secret police and by outlawing labor strikes, actions that were direct attacks on the Italian state. Mussolini and his followers consolidated their power through a series of methods and laws that transformed Italy into a one-party dictatorship. Over the next few years, Mussolini established dictatorial authority and created a new totalitarian state in Europe. Mussolini was acutely aware that Italy was not prepared for a prolonged conflict, given its limited resources and the relatively small scale of its World War II military interventions in Ethiopia, Albania, and Spain. Despite this, Mussolini chose to enter the war, driven by the imperial ambitions of his regime and the support of his strongest ally, Nazi Germany. He aspired to restore a version of the ancient Roman Empire in the Mediterranean, and by late 1942, these goals were partially realized. By that point, Italian influence extended throughout the Mediterranean basin, and the Axis powers were at their peak on all fronts. Albania, parts of Slovenia, coastal Dalmatia, and Montenegro had been annexed into the Italian state. Most of Greece had been occupied by Italy following the Greco-Italian War and the Battle of Greece. On October 28th, Mussolini issued an ultimatum to Greece, demanding the cession of Greek territory. Before the ultimatum had even expired, the Italian army invaded Greece, but their ineffectiveness was soon evident. The invasion turned into a disaster as 140,000 Italian troops encountered a well-determined Greek enemy on mountainous terrain along the Albanian-Greek border. What was expected to be a swift victory became a humiliating failure. By mid-November, the Greeks had not only stopped the Italian invasion, but also pushed the Italians back into Albania. Despite their early setbacks, the Italo-German forces eventually achieved victories against Greece and Yugoslavia, and occupied parts of British-held Egypt during their push to El Alamein after their victory at Gazala. However, Italy's conquests were heavily contested. Even though Yugoslavia and Greece were defeated, large partisan movements in these regions created significant challenges for Axis forces. After the struggles in North Africa, Mussolini requested assistance from his German ally. By May 1943, the Allies had defeated the Axis forces in North Africa, necessitating new strategic plans. Even before this victory, disagreements existed among the Allies, particularly concerning their future strategies. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill favored utilizing Britain's naval power to conduct small, targeted operations to weaken the enemy. In contrast, the United States, with its larger army, preferred a more direct approach. The ability to launch a full-scale campaign depended on first winning the Battle of the Atlantic. The U.S. military believed that a large-scale invasion of France was necessary to end the war in Europe as quickly as possible. The British, however, argued that the presence of large numbers of troops trained for amphibious landings in the Mediterranean made a limited-scale invasion there more feasible and useful. Eventually, the U.S. and British political leadership reached a compromise. Both agreed to commit most of their forces to an invasion of France in early 1944, while also launching a relatively small-scale campaign in Italy. President Franklin D. Roosevelt was particularly attracted to the idea of eliminating Italy from the war, knowing that Italian internal problems and their previous military failures made them vulnerable. The hope was that an invasion might force Italy out of the conflict, allowing Allied naval forces, particularly the Royal Navy, to dominate the Mediterranean Sea and potentially open a larger southern front. Italian divisions stationed in the Balkans and France would be recalled to defend Italy, while Germany would have to transfer troops from the Eastern Front to defend Italy and the southern coast of France, thereby aiding the Soviet Union. The combined Allied invasion of Sicily began on July 10, 1943, with both amphibious and airborne landings. The U.S. 7th Army, under Lieutenant General George S. Patton, and the British 8th Army, under General Bernard Montgomery, led the invasion. Although the defending German and Italian forces could not prevent the Allies from capturing the island, they managed to evacuate most of their troops to the mainland. On September 3, 1943, the British Eighth Army, still under Montgomery, landed in the toe of Italy as part of Operation Baytown. The same day, the Italian government agreed to an armistice with the Allies. The armistice was publicly announced on September 8th by two broadcasts, first by General Eisenhower and then by Marshal Badoglio. However, the German forces were prepared to defend Italy without Italian assistance. On October 13, 1943, 1 month after Italy surrendered to the Allies, it declared war on Germany, its former Axis partner. Mussolini had led Italy into the war after forming an alliance with Germany in 1936. But by the summer of 1943, as Allied forces landed in Sicily, public support for the war and for Mussolini waned. On July 25, 1943, Mussolini was ousted, and his replacement, General Pietro Badoglio, sought peace with the Allies, reaching an armistice on September 3rd. Germany, which had troops stationed throughout Italy, responded by occupying the country and seizing control from the disorganized Italian military. Despite Germany's occupation, Italy's switch of sides was not surprising, given the country's many shortcomings, not only militarily, but also politically and socially. Italy's logistical deficiencies were evident in its previous campaigns, primarily due to a lack of proper equipment and poor training. The Italian army was not only poorly equipped with outdated or insufficient weapons, but also poorly trained in modern warfare tactics. Many officers were ill-prepared for the new type of war, and some generals were appointed more for their loyalty to Mussolini than for their military capabilities. Although Italy was considered Germany's main ally, it was not ready for a large-scale conflict. The country's industrial sector was small, and its preparedness and training were limited. Unlike Germany, which had invested heavily in arming its military with tanks, artillery, and warplanes, Italy's industrial output was insufficient in both quantity and quality compared to that of its enemies. Geographically, Italy was vulnerable as a large peninsula, with extensive coastlines to defend. With enemies capable of amphibious and paratrooper landings, and with the Mediterranean Sea increasingly dominated by Allied naval forces, Italy's position in the war was untenable. The Navy did its part in securing the coasts and large parts of the sea, but the lack of modern warplanes in sufficient numbers to support naval operations was a significant disadvantage. North Africa could have served as a buffer between Italy and the Allies, but the unsuccessful campaign there paved the way for the British and American landings in Sicily and subsequently the toe of Italy. For much of the Italian political class, it became clear that the war was no longer outside their borders, but within. As the Allies advanced northward through Italy, they encountered increasingly difficult terrain. Allied forces made slow progress through the Italian peninsula, finally defeating Axis forces in May 1945. Mussolini, who had been rescued by the Germans from an Italian prison and made the leader of a puppet state, the Italian Social Republic, in parts of Italy not occupied by the Allies, was captured and executed by Italian partisans. Mussolini's ambition to restore the Roman Empire ultimately led Italy to ruin. The country's inability to sustain a prolonged war, coupled with its military and political failures, brought about its downfall. Italy's defeat was a direct result of its overreaching ambitions and the limitations of its resources and leadership.